My mother abandoned me as a child. But when my father died and I inherited $300K, she came back regretful. Then I discovered she stole $177,000 to spend it with my half-sister, and now she's paying every penny in a lawsuit that destroyed her life. I'm 29 years old. I work in digital marketing, and up until like a year and a half ago, I was convinced that I had already gotten over the whole thing with my mother. You know, the abandonment, the indifference, all of that. I had done therapy, I had moved on with my life, and honestly, I thought she couldn't hurt me anymore. But it turns out I was completely wrong, because what she did was so calculated, so cold, that there are still days when I have trouble processing it. And the worst part is that she used my father's death, the greatest pain of my life, as the perfect opportunity to rob me. Literally. So yeah, I need to tell this story because I've kept it to myself for too long and because maybe someone else needs to hear that it's okay to cut ties with toxic people, even if it's your own mother. I guess I should start at the beginning. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old, and it wasn't one of those friendly divorces where everyone stays friends and celebrates holidays together. It was ugly, with screaming and lawyers and my mother basically telling my father that he could keep the brat if he cared so much. Yeah, that's what she called me, the brat. I was 8 years old and I heard my mother refer to me as the brat who ruined her life. That marks you, obviously. But at that moment, I just wanted my parents to stop fighting and for everything to go back to normal. Spoiler alert, it never went back to normal. After the divorce, I had joint custody, like 1 week with my father and 1 week with my mother, and at first it worked more or less okay. My father, Christopher, was an accountant and worked a lot, but he always found time for me. He helped me with homework. We cooked together on Sundays, things like that. With my mother, Susan, it was different. She got a job at a real estate company and was obsessed with remaking her life. She went out a lot, dated constantly, and I was basically a nuisance in her new life as a free single woman. But well, she was my mother. And I kept hoping that at some point, things would get better between us. When I was like 10 years old, my mother met Gregory. He was also divorced. No kids, worked in finance or something like that. Had quite a bit of money. At first, he was nice to me. Bought me things, asked me about school, the usual stuff. I thought, okay, maybe this is good. Maybe my mother will be happier and everything will get better. They got married super fast, like within a year of meeting. And when I was 11 years old, my half-sister Stephanie was born. And that's when everything really changed. It wasn't gradual, it was like a switch. Suddenly, I was invisible in that house. Gregory no longer talked to me unless it was strictly necessary. My mother was completely focused on Stephanie, and I became the stranger who visited every 2 weeks. Stephanie was their little princess, their perfect girl, and I was the daughter from the previous marriage who reminded them of the past. I started feeling uncomfortable there, like I was invading a space that no longer belonged to me. My mother stopped asking me how I was, stopped going to my school events, and basically only talked to me to scold me or to ask me to babysit Stephanie. The moment that changed everything for me was when I was 13 years old. I was at my mother and Gregory's house during my scheduled week, and I overheard Gregory talking on the phone with someone, probably a friend or his brother. I don't know. I was in my room, but the door was slightly open and his voice came through clearly from the living room. I heard him say, "We don't need her coming around so much anymore. Susan has her own family now. The girl just complicates things." And then my mother, my own mother, said something like, "I know, but the custody agreement. I'm going to talk to my lawyer to see if we can reduce the days." I froze in my room. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I was 13 years old and had just discovered that my mother was planning to legally get rid of me. I didn't cry at that moment. I think I was in shock. I packed my things in silence, waited for Gregory to leave for work the next day, and told my mother I wanted to go live with my father permanently. She didn't even try to convince me to stay. She just said, "If that's what you want," and called my father to come pick me up 3 days earlier than planned. Moving in with my father was the best decision of my life, honestly. He never asked me what had happened, never spoke badly about my mother in front of me. He just made me feel welcome and loved. We adapted the whole household routine so I would be comfortable. He enrolled me in therapy when he saw I was processing a lot of sadness, and basically showed me what unconditional love really is. During the following years, my mother and I barely had any contact, She called on my birthday, sometimes at Christmas, but the conversations were superficial and tense. Stephanie and I practically had no relationship. She was like 5 or 6 years younger than me, and we were complete strangers. My maternal grandmother, Susan's mother, stayed in contact with me and made it clear that she didn't approve of how my mother had treated me, which helped me a lot. Fast forward to when I was 26 years old. I had already finished college, was working in digital marketing for a mid-sized company, had my own small but nice apartment, and my life was pretty stable. My father was still my favorite person in the world. We talked almost every day, had dinner together on Sundays, and then came the news that destroyed me. My father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors said they detected it too late, that he probably only had a few months left, maybe a year if he responded well to treatment. I don't know how to describe what it feels like when they tell you that the most important person in your life is dying. It's like the world stops making sense. Suddenly, everything that seemed important, my job, my plans, everything, became completely irrelevant. The next 4 months were a nightmare. My father deteriorated fast, very fast. I quit my job to take care of him full-time, moved back into his house, and basically dedicated every second to being with him. There were good moments, where we talked about everything, where he told me stories from when he was young, where he gave me advice about life. But there were also horrible moments, where the pain was so intense that he could barely speak, where I could only hold his hand and cry. My father died on a Tuesday morning, in his bed, with me holding his hand. He was 57 years old. It was peaceful at the end, I guess, if something like that can be peaceful. But losing him was like losing my anchor, my point of reference in the world. The days after the funeral were horrible. I couldn't sleep, could barely eat, and my father's house felt empty and cold without him. My mother didn't come to the funeral, by the way. She sent flowers and a card that said, "My condolences," as if we were distant acquaintances. That hurt. But honestly, I didn't expect anything from her anymore. About 3 weeks after the funeral, my father's lawyer called me to read the will. My father had left me everything: his house, his savings, his investments. It turned out he had been very careful with his money for years, and after selling the house and liquidating everything, I ended up with around $300,000. It was a huge amount of money, obviously, but I would have given it all for 5 more minutes with him. I didn't feel lucky. I felt empty. I put the money in a savings account and basically forgot about it. I couldn't think about that. I couldn't think about anything other than the fact that my father was gone. And then, like 2 months after my father died, I got a message from my mother. We hadn't talked in probably 2 years, and suddenly she wrote, "Alexis, I need to talk to you. It's important." At first I thought about ignoring her, honestly. But there was a part of me, that part that was still the 8-year-old girl who wanted her mother's love, that thought, maybe this is different. Maybe Dad's death made her reflect. So I responded and we agreed to meet for coffee. When I saw her, I almost didn't recognize her. She had aged quite a bit. She was like 52 years old at that point, but looked older, tired. She sat across from me and started crying before I could say anything. She told me that Gregory had died 6 months earlier, sudden heart attack, and that she had been dealing with everything alone. She said she had thought a lot about me, about how she had treated me, and that she regretted everything, that she wanted to try to rebuild our relationship if I was willing. I was vulnerable, devastated by my father's death, and desperate to have something that resembled a family. So I told her yes, that we could try. During the following months, we saw each other regularly. We had coffee every week, sometimes had dinner together, and she seemed genuinely interested in my life. She asked me about my work, about my friends, and told me things about Stephanie, who apparently was in college studying graphic design. My mother seemed repentant and vulnerable, and I started to believe that maybe, finally, we could have a normal mother-daughter relationship. I started lowering my defenses, trusting her again. Looking back, that was exactly what she wanted. About 4 months after we started reconnecting, my mother called me crying. She said she had gone to the doctor because she had terrible back pain and that they had diagnosed her with a serious spinal problem, massive herniated disc or something like that, and that she needed urgent surgery. She told me that her insurance would cover most of it, but that she needed $20,000 up front for a specific specialist, who was the only one who could do the surgery safely. She said that if she didn't get operated on soon, she could become paralyzed. I panicked completely. The idea of losing another parent, even my mother with whom I was barely rebuilding a relationship, terrified me. I asked her if I could see the hospital papers, the doctor's documents, and she sent me some PDFs that looked legitimate, with the hospital logo and everything. She told me she needed the money in 2 weeks maximum, or she would lose the appointment with the specialist. I had the money from my father's inheritance sitting there, untouched, and I thought, what else is that money for if not for emergencies like this? So I told her yes, that I would pay. But here's the thing. When I went to make the transfer, the bank asked me how much I wanted to transfer, and I said $20,000. And my mother, who was sitting next to me because we had gone to the bank together, said, "Oh, honey, I forgot to mention that I also need to cover the pre-operative studies and some special medications. It would be like $25,000 in total." And then she said, "And Stephanie is with me. She's going to take care of me during recovery, but she had to quit her job. Do you think you could help her with some money for her expenses too, while she takes care of me? Just for a few months until I recover." I was sitting there, at the bank, and my mother was looking at me with those eyes of, "Please help me. I'm your mother." And I was just thinking that I couldn't lose another parent. So I said, "Okay, how much do you need in total?" And she did some quick calculations on her phone and said, with everything, medications, studies, Stephanie's expenses, anesthesiologist fees that insurance doesn't cover, it would be like $177,000. She said it so casually, like she was asking to borrow $100. And I, like a complete idiot, transferred the $177,000 to her account that same day. My mother cried and hugged me and told me I was her angel, that this was saving her life, that she would never forget what I was doing for her. She said the surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later at a specialized hospital in another state, that she and Stephanie would leave a few days early to do all the preoperative studies, and that she would keep me informed of everything. We agreed that I would pay the rest of the medical expenses as they came up, but that with the $177,000, the majority was already covered. They supposedly left for the hospital a week later. My mother sent me some messages. Things like, "We've arrived. The doctor is very good. I feel nervous but confident." And then on the day of the supposed surgery, she wrote me, going into the operating room, "Stephanie is with me. I love you, daughter." And I was in my apartment dying of anxiety, waiting for news, checking my phone every 5 minutes. Like 3 hours later, I received a message from Stephanie saying, "Everything went well. Mom is in recovery. The doctor says it was a success." I felt so relieved that I cried. The following days, my mother sent short messages. "I'm sore but improving. The doctors are happy with my progress." And then she started spacing out the messages more, like one every 2 days, always with excuses that she was sleeping a lot because of the medications or that the hospital had bad reception. I gave her space. I didn't want to bother her while she was recovering. I thought that soon she would be back home and we could resume our weekly dinners. And then, a week and a half after the supposed surgery, my friend Kelly sent me a message. Kelly and I had gone to college together and had stayed in touch, and she knew the whole situation with my mother because I had told her we were reconnecting. Her message said, "Alexis, I don't want to alarm you, but I just saw something weird on Instagram and I think you need to see it." She sent me screenshots from Stephanie's Instagram account, which apparently was public even though I didn't follow her. The screenshots showed Stephanie in Paris, at the fucking Eiffel Tower, with the caption, "Living my best life in the city of love." There were photos of her at fancy restaurants, at the Louvre, drinking champagne in what looked like a luxury hotel. The photos had dates, and they were all from the last few days, the same days she was supposedly in a hospital taking care of our mother after emergency surgery. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath my feet. I went straight to Instagram and searched for Stephanie's account myself. There were dozens of photos, archived stories, everything documenting what was obviously a luxury vacation in Paris. And in some photos was my mother, my supposedly recently operated on mother, smiling and raising a glass of wine in front of the illuminated Eiffel Tower. One of the photos had the caption, "Mom and I deserved this trip. New beginnings." I stared at my phone, unable to process it. I checked the dates again, thinking maybe I was confused, that maybe they were old photos that Stephanie was posting now. But no, the dates matched perfectly. The day my mother supposedly went into surgery, Stephanie had posted a photo having croissants for breakfast at a Parisian cafe. The day I received the message that everything had gone well, there was a photo of the two of them on a Seine river cruise. I couldn't breathe. I literally felt like I was running out of air. I called the hospital my mother had mentioned, the supposed specialized hospital. The receptionist was very kind and searched their records. "We don't have any patient registered with that name," she told me. I gave her the exact dates, my mother's full name, everything. Nothing. No record, no surgery, no Susan in their files. I asked her if maybe she could be under another name, or if there was some error in the system. She checked 3 times and confirmed to me that there was no record. I immediately went to my online bank account and put a temporary hold on my account. I still had like $100,000 left from my father's inheritance that I hadn't transferred, and I wasn't going to allow them to touch another penny. Then, I started investigating. I downloaded all the Instagram photos from Stephanie, documented the dates, saved all the messages my mother had sent me. I searched for the hotel that appeared in the background of some photos, and found that it cost like €800 per night. I searched for the restaurants, all super fancy. I did the approximate calculations and estimated that between flights, hotel, meals, and everything else, they had easily spent about $50,000 or $60,000 on that trip. With my money. With the money my father had saved for years. With the money that was supposed to be for me to have a stable future. They had spent it on champagne and Instagram photos in Paris while sending me messages, making me believe my mother was fighting for her life in a hospital. I tried calling my mother like 20 times. She didn't answer any of them. I sent her messages. "Susan, answer the phone now. I know you're in Paris. I know you lied to me." Nothing. I called Stephanie. She didn't answer either. Finally, like 2 days later, I received a long message from my mother. It said she could explain everything, that the hospital had discharged her earlier than expected because she was recovering so well, and that the doctor had suggested she take a relaxing trip as part of her recovery. That Stephanie had found cheap tickets to Paris, and they had decided to go for a few days to celebrate that the surgery had been successful. That they were going to return soon, and would give me back the money that was left over. It was so obviously a lie that it almost made me laugh. Almost. I responded, "Susan, call the hospital where you supposedly had surgery and tell me what they say." She didn't respond for hours. Then she sent me another message saying there had been a misunderstanding, that the surgery had been done at a private clinic associated with the hospital, not at the hospital itself, and that's why it didn't appear in their records. She sent me a PDF file that was supposedly the invoice from the clinic. I opened it, and it was the fakest thing I had ever seen. The logo was pixelated, there were spelling errors, the dates didn't match. She hadn't even bothered to make a good forgery. At that point, I wasn't sad anymore. I was furious. I gave them an ultimatum. "You have 48 hours to return the $177,000 to me, or I'm going to take legal action." My mother responded that it was impossible, that the money was already spent on medical procedures and that I was being cruel and insensitive. Stephanie sent me a separate message saying that I had always been a horrible and selfish sister, and that Mom had really been sick, but now I was making her recovery worse with my drama. The 48 hours passed. I didn't receive a single cent. Then Stephanie posted a link to a GoFundMe on Instagram. The description said something like, "My mom and I are stranded in Europe after a medical emergency and we need help buying plane tickets back home. Any donation is appreciated." It had a goal of $5,000. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. They had spent more than $150,000 of my money on luxury vacations, and now they were begging for money on the internet pretending to be victims. When they finally returned to the United States like 2 weeks later, my mother tried to call me. I didn't answer. She left me a voicemail saying we needed to talk in person, that I didn't understand the full situation, that she really had been sick, and that she regretted that things had gotten complicated but that it had all been a misunderstanding. A $177,000 misunderstanding, of course. I decided that was enough. I hired a lawyer. I showed him all the evidence, the messages, the Instagram photos, the fact that there were no real medical records, everything. My lawyer told me I had a solid case to sue for fraud and recommended that I also file charges for defamation because, it turns out, my mother had been telling various family members that I had promised to pay her rent for a year and then had backed out, leaving her at risk of eviction. Her landlord had contacted me directly, asking for the money, completely confused. I had to explain to him that I had never promised anything and that my mother was a liar. We filed the lawsuit. My mother and Stephanie initially tried to defend themselves, saying the money had been a gift, not a loan, and that I had no right to claim it back. But the messages I had sent them saying specifically what the money was for, plus the fact that they couldn't provide any legitimate medical documentation, plus all the photographic evidence of their luxury trip, made their defense fall apart completely. The process took like 8 months. 8 horrible months where I had to relive everything. Where my mother told anyone who would listen that I was a cruel daughter who had abandoned her in her time of need. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was one of the few people on that side of the family who believed me completely. She called me after finding out about everything and told me, "Alexis, your mother has always been manipulative, but this is a new level even for her, and I want you to know that I don't blame you for doing what you have to do." That helped me so much. I also discovered that my cousin Rebecca had gone through something similar with my mother years before, although for a smaller amount of money, and she also ended up cutting contact. The trial finally ruled in my favor. The court ordered my mother to return the $177,000 to me, plus interest and legal costs. Obviously, she didn't have that money. She had spent it all. So, a payment plan was established that basically means I'm going to be receiving monthly payments for years. So far, I've recovered like $30,000 in payments. At this rate, it will take me a decade to recover everything, if I ever recover it all completely. But at least there's a legal record of what she did. At least she can no longer go around saying I'm the bad guy in the story without there being official documents proving otherwise. I cut complete contact with my mother and Stephanie after the trial. I blocked their numbers, their social media, everything. My mother tried to contact me through other people, sending me letters, showing up once at my work until I told security not to let her in. Each contact attempt was some variation of, "I'm your mother. You can't do this to me. Or you'll regret this when I die." But I didn't feel anything toward her anymore, honestly. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel hate. I just felt indifference. She had used my father's death, my most vulnerable moment, to scam me. There's no coming back from that. What hurts me most, apart from the obvious theft of the money, is that she destroyed any possibility of me having a mother figure in my life. I really had wanted to give her a chance. I really had believed we could rebuild something. And she saw it as an opportunity to take money from me. Everything, every coffee we had together, every dinner, conversation about rebuilding our relationship. Everything had been part of a plan to gain my trust enough so I would give her access to my father's inheritance. That's what I still struggle to process. That someone can be that calculated and cold, especially with their own daughter. A year and a half after all this, I'm in a better place. It was hard for me. I'm not going to lie. I had to go back to therapy. I had to work hard on not blaming myself for having been so naive. My therapist helped me understand that I wasn't naive, that I was a grieving daughter who wanted to believe her mother finally loved her, and that's completely human and understandable. It's not my fault that she chose to manipulate me instead of simply being a good mother. Professionally, things are going well. I returned to my job after all the legal drama, and a few months ago, I received a promotion. My bosses were incredibly understanding during the whole process, and that reminded me that there are good people in the world, people who support you without expecting anything in return. I've also been dating someone, a guy I met through mutual friends, and when I told him this whole story, he just hugged me and told me I deserved so much more than what my mother had given me. That made me cry, but in the good way. I've been thinking a lot about my father lately, about how he worked so hard for years to leave me that money, and how my mother wasted it on champagne and expensive hotels. But then I remember that my father left me much more than money. He left me the example of what it means to love someone unconditionally. He left me beautiful memories, and he left me the confidence that I'm valuable and deserving of real love. That's something my mother can never take from me, even if she takes every last cent of that inheritance. I still haven't decided what to do with the money I have left. The $100,000 I managed to protect. Part of me wants to use it for a down payment on a house, like my father probably would have wanted. Another part wants to invest it and let it grow. For now it's there, safe, waiting for me to be ready to decide. I'm not in a hurry. I've already learned that you shouldn't make important decisions when you're vulnerable or grieving. The last I heard about my mother was like 3 months ago, through my grandmother. Apparently she's living in a small apartment, still has a job but is struggling financially because part of her salary goes to the restitution payments she owes me. Stephanie still lives with her. They're not doing very well financially either. When my grandmother asked me if I would ever consider forgiving them or at least talking to them, I told her no, that door is permanently closed, and that I feel neither guilt nor remorse about that decision. Because here's the thing, and this is something I've learned after this whole disaster. You can love someone, you can want to have a relationship with someone, but if that person treats you like garbage over and over again, at some point you have to decide that your peace of mind and your dignity are more important than maintaining a toxic relationship, even if that relationship is with your own mother. People always say, but it's your family, as if that's enough excuse to allow abuse or manipulation. But the truth is that family should earn your respect and your love, not demand it just for sharing blood. My mother had infinite opportunities to be a good mother. When she abandoned me as a child, she could have fought for me. When we reconnected after my father's death, she could have built a real relationship with me. But at every opportunity, she chose her own interests over me. And when she finally had the chance to show me that I mattered to her even a little bit, she chose instead to scam me in the cruelest way possible. Those were her decisions, not mine. Sometimes I wonder if she feels any kind of remorse. Probably not, honestly. People like that never admit they did something wrong. They always find a way to blame others or justify their actions. But it's not my problem anymore. She'll have to live with the consequences of what she did, and I'm going to move forward with my life without her in it. Last week was my father's birthday. He would have turned 60. I went to the cemetery, brought him flowers, sat there for a while and told him everything that had happened, as if he could hear me. I told him I regretted not protecting the money he left me better, but that at least I had protected part of it. I told him I missed him every day. And I don't know if it's real or just something I needed to feel, but I felt like he was telling me he was proud of me for standing up for myself, for not letting myself get walked over. My father always taught me to have dignity and self-respect, and that's exactly what I did when I decided to sue my mother and cut contact. So, yeah, that's my story. My mother robbed me, lied to me, manipulated me, and will probably go to her grave blaming me for all of this. But I'm okay. Or at least I'm on my way to being okay. I have a good job. I have friends who support me. I have a grandmother who really loves me, and I have the certainty that I made the right decision. That's enough for now, I guess.